The body is the field of activity and is composed of material nature. The individual soul that is embodied and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, with a small p, or the living entity. He is one knower, and the other knower is the Supersoul, or Paramatma. Paramatma with a big P. Of course, it is to be understood that both the Supersoul and the individual entity are different manifestations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the Supersoul is in the category of his personal expansion. Both material nature and the living entity are eternal. That is to say that they existed before the creation. The material manifestation is from the energy of the Supreme Lord, and so also are the living entities. But the living entities are of the superior energy. Both the living entities and the material nature existed before this cosmos was manifested. Material nature was absorbed into the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, and when it was required, it was manifested by the agency of Mahatattva. Similarly, the living entities are also in him, and because they are conditioned, they are averse to serving the Supreme Lord. Thus, they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky. But with the coming forth of material nature, these living entities are again given a chance to act in the material world and prepare themselves to enter into the spiritual world. That is the mystery of this material creation. Now, you see, this is explaining the purpose of material creation. Material creation is a place where living entities like us can come because we revolted against God and we're given a chance to rehabilitate ourselves or go deeper into illusion and suffering. So if we awaken from the stupor of ignorance and understand that we don't want to suffer anymore, suffer what? Birth, death, old age, disease, miseries of this body, miseries caused by other people, and miseries caused by natural cataclysmic events. And we say, I've had enough. I want to solve this problem of birth, death, and miseries. So, at that point, they make an inquiry, because the human being has intelligence enough to research this question. Why am I suffering? Why is there so much trouble in this body? And how can I get out of this situation? Well, the knowledge to do that has been given in the Vedas. You won't find that knowledge in a book on computer science or a book on biology or a book on archaeology or anthropology or any of those so-called sciences. The science of liberation from the cycle of birth and death is the Bhagavad Gita, the scientific text. It's the Bhagavad Gita and its corollary book, the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, the real purpose of material nature, or the material world, is a place where we can rehabilitate ourselves to return to the spiritual world. Therefore, it's like a prison. In a prison, the prisoners are forced to do things. So we were forced to be born, forced to get old, forced to get sick, and forced to die. If you think carefully about this, you'll see that it's true. You don't remember wanting to be born. You're not choosing to get old, get sick, and eventually dying. These things are forced on us. Just like we're forced to eat, to sleep, and defend, and so forth. All these things are forced on us. But we can rehabilitate ourselves if we meet a bona fide instructor or guru, and who teaches bona fide knowledge, meaning Bhagavad Gita as it is. So, this is the mystery of the material creation. People think the material creation is for us, for our enjoyment. But they fail to see that there's a law of nature, just like there's the law of gravity, there's another law of nature which says if we try for selfish sense gratification, we will also have commensurate suffering. Now, that law of nature is not taught in schools, but it's a fact, and this is explained in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which says, there's a verse where it says, one second, I'll find this verse. Verse number 22, 5th chapter, verse 22, where it says, an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses, O son of Kunti. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. And in the purport, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada says, therefore, those who are true yogis or learned transcendentalists are not attracted by sense pleasures, which are the causes of continuous material existence. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. That's the law of nature. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he or she is entrapped by material miseries. So, this law of nature, which is true, is not being taught in any school. That's why people suffer due to ignorance. Ignorance is the enemy of mankind. So in this verse, the next verse, text 2 of this chapter entitled The Understanding of Material Nature, says, when the soul is under the spell of material nature and false ego, identifying his body as the self, he becomes absorbed in material activities, and by the influence of false ego, he thinks that he is the proprietor of everything. So now we're seeing the symptoms of people who are in ignorance and who are self-inflicting themselves with by causing suffering due to ignorance. Just like a child is playing with an electric plug and is trying to stick something into one of the holes, and they succeed, and then they get an electric shock. See? So that is ignorance. They don't understand that the electric plug is not meant to be played with. It's very dangerous, and you can actually kill yourself playing with it. Or a child is playing with matches. They don't realize that they could set themselves or the house on fire by playing with matches. So ignorance is the enemy. And in this verse, the symptom of people who are in ignorance are detailed. When one is under the spell of material nature and the false ego, identifying his body as the self, so that's number 1 point. One thinks, I am this body. They do not identify with the soul in the body. He becomes absorbed in material activities. Point number 2. People are not interested in spiritual activities. They're only interested in material activities to make more money in order to have more sense gratification. So they identify with the body, they become absorbed in material activities, and by the influence of false ego, the person thinks that he is the proprietor of everything. So ignorance number 3, thinking I am the proprietor of this house, this body, this car, this bank account, this family, this thing, that thing. So these are all actually false concepts. How do we know that? Because you have no control over the body. You can do whatever you want. You're still going to get old, you get sick, and you're going to die, and you're going to be kicked out of the body. Number 2, we have no control over our possessions because eventually we're going to lose everything. at the moment of death. And number 3, all the material activities we engage in simply gives us more reason to stay in the material world and continue to suffer. So all 3 things are false, because according to the Bhagavad Gita, only those things that are eternal are real. Things that are false have a temporary existence. It's not that they don't exist, they do exist temporarily, but eventually they disappear and you're left with nothing. One is not really left with nothing. You're left with your karma. You're the bag of good and bad karma, which means you have to take birth again and go through the whole process another time, with no guarantee that one will be in the human body. Okay, so it says here, so we just went over some symptoms of a person who is in ignorance. And His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada explains, actually the conditioned soul is forced to act under the pressure of the modes of material nature. The living entity has no independence. When he is under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is free. But when, under the impression that he is satisfying his senses, he engages in sense gratificatory activities, he is actually under the spell of material nature. Well, we just read that law, which predicates that spell of material nature. The spell of material nature is one is convinced that they are the proprietor, they are the enjoyer, and they're independent, and thus they engage in sense gratification. And what happens? This law of material nature takes over. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. So, and you can see this. Let's say someone goes to a bar and drinks, and the next day they have a hangover. Well, they're addicted to material pleasure, but they became entrapped by material misery, the hangover. Let's say one goes to the casino to gamble and they lose their money, right? So they went there to be happy and to be a winner, and they walk out a loser, right? And so forth. Just like I know this young boy, he was thinking he could buy cars and repair them and sell them for a profit. So the first car he bought, and he spent all his money. He had saved up $1,500, and he bought an old car, and he was going to fix it up. And it turned out that after 1 week, the gaskets in the car exploded or blew up, and it damaged the motor, and he lost everything. It was irreparable. If he was going to repair it, it would have cost thousands of dollars. So he lost his money. So he started out calculating that he'd spend $1,500 and he would fix up a car and sell it for maybe $3,000 or $4,000. And now he ended up with zero, actually minus. So you see, this is the law of nature. If you try to have material pleasures, they will be accompanied by material miseries. But nobody believes that such a law exists. But it's an actual law of nature, just as active as the law of gravity. What goes up comes down, you see. But because people are ignorant of this law, they keep trying over and over again to be happy with different forms of sense gratification. And the result is it's always followed by some kind of misery. Just like there's a poem, there was a poem in Hindi where a person says, I spent so much money and time building a new house, and before I moved in, it burned down. Right? So hopefully they had insurance, but usually they don't in India. So this is what happens. See, I know a man, it's a very wealthy guy. one day I went to see him, and he was very happy. And I said, "Is everything going all right?" He said, "Yeah, everything's just fine." I said, "Well, what's happening?" He said, "Well, I was studying this one stock for 1 year, and I became convinced that it was very, very undervalued. And therefore I spent $2 million buying stock." I said, "Is that why you're happy?" He said, "Yeah, I'm expecting that in the next 6 or 8 months or a year it's going to double in value." I said, "I hope so." I said, "I'll come back in a year and we'll see what happens." So a year later I went back, and he wasn't so happy. I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I bought that stock. Remember I told you about it?" I said, "Yeah. And instead of going up, the company went belly up and I lost everything." Well, you see, even though he studied the stock for 1 year before he bought it, and he was convinced that it was very much undervalued. So this is the material world. This is what happens. There's a law called Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law says, imagine the worst thing that could ever happen, and you should be aware that it's possible that it could happen. It's called the worst case scenario. So, but wait a minute. This law of nature, which says the more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more one is entrapped by material miseries. This is a guarantee. This is a guarantee. It's a law of nature that we're going to fail due to this frenetic surge or effort to have material pleasures, meaning sense gratification from the body. So now it says, when one is under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he or she is free. But when under the impression that he is satisfying his senses, he engages in sense gratificatory activities, he is actually under the spell of material nature. In Bhagavad Gita it is said, Prakriti kriyamanani. One acts according to the particular modes of nature he has acquired. Guna refers to the qualities of nature. He is under the qualities of nature, but he falsely thinks that he is the proprietor. This false sense of proprietorship can be avoided simply by engaging oneself in devotional service under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his bona fide representative. Now, are we a proprietor? Well, on a temporary basis, we have the impression that we're a proprietor. Like, for example, the large Indian Gujarati community that lived in Uganda for several generations were convinced they were proprietors. They had accumulated a lot of wealth and property. Well, Idi Amin became the president dictator of Uganda. And one of the first things he did after he became president dictator, he kicked out all the Indians. He gave them 24 hours notice. Get out or you'll be killed. And you can only carry one suitcase with you. And we will check the suitcase to make sure you're not taking out jewelry or money. They had to leave with nothing after 3 generations of living in the country and accumulating a lot of wealth and many properties and businesses. They left with nothing, or they were killed, either way, you see. So there's no guarantee that of anything in this material world other than old age, disease, and death. That's the only thing that's guaranteed. The rest, we will be wealthy, we will be happy, we will be honored. There's no guarantee of that. The situation can change precipitously, and we can lose everything. It happens often. Someone gets cancer, someone has an accident, someone has a terrible legal case, and so forth, or someone is murdered. It's going on all the time. So as long as we think that it says this false sense of proprietorship can be avoided simply by engaging oneself in devotional service under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his bona fide representative. Arjuna, in the Bhagavad Gita, was trying to accept for himself the responsibility for killing his grandfather and teacher in the fight. But he became freed from that proprietorship of action when he acted under the direction of Krishna. He fought, but he was actually freed from the reactions of fighting, although in the beginning, when he was non-violent, unwilling to fight, the entire responsibility was upon him. That is the difference between liberation and conditioning. A conditioned soul may be very good and act in a mode of goodness, but still he is conditioned under the spell of material nature. A devotee, however, acts completely under the direction of the Supreme Lord. Thus his actions may not appear to be of a very high quality to a common man, but the devotee has no responsibility. Okay, so this is a serious statement, this question of no responsibility. That has to be understood in the proper perspective. What is a proper perspective? It's like this. If I join the United States military and I'm trained to be, let's say, a Marine, and I am sent to a war zone, and I have been trained in the Geneva Convention, which means, you know, how to deal with prisoners and the laws governing warfare, or you could call it some kind of civilized warfare. Well, while I'm fighting and obviously killing people, if I violate those laws and those conventions, even though in the eyes of many people I may be a hero, I'm going to be prosecuted because I infringed on the Geneva Convention. That is, if you take a prisoner, you're not supposed to kill the prisoner who surrenders. Sometimes in the heat of battle and the psychosis of always killing, sometimes soldiers do kill prisoners, you know, for X reasons. They are arrested and tried and eventually court-martialed and put in jail, or they could be executed also in severe cases. So we see that as long as I follow the rules, I might be killing many people, I'm not prosecuted as a killer because I did it according to the rules of given to me by the United States Army and by the international organizations such as the Geneva Convention. But if I violate the rules, even though I might be a hero in many ways, I'll be prosecuted. Okay. So I have the right to kill people, but under the rules and regulations of engagement in warfare. And then I would be considered a hero. But if I violate those rules, I'll be considered a murderer and I'll be prosecuted. So there are certain situations in which I am not responsible for my acts. If it is granted to me by higher authority. So here Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna refused to fight in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, he gave many good reasons why he should not fight. Many of them were moral reasons or shastric reasons. But because Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and because Krishna is all-knowing, he's in the heart of everyone as Paramatma, he rejected Arjuna's reasoning. Why? Because Arjuna ignored Krishna's order and followed his independent thought. What was his independent thought? How will I be happy if I kill the grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, Bhisma Pitamaha, my own Guru Dronacharya, and my cousin brothers, the Kurus, if I win the battle? And how will I be happy if I lose the battle and my brothers and my family members are killed? So his family members were on both sides. So he didn't see how he would be happy either winning or losing. Therefore, he refused to follow Krishna's order. And this is why Krishna did not accept his refusal, and at that point, Arjuna became confused, but he very astutely decided to surrender to Krishna, accept him as his guru, and then the obligation is there. He has questions, and he surrendered to the Lord, and the Lord is the original guru. Because of the surrender of the disciple and the acquiescence or submissiveness, the guru has an absolute responsibility to answer the questions. So Arjuna asked quintessential questions to try to clear the path to his accepting the instructions of the Lord. And the Lord answered every one of his questions perfectly. What were those questions? They were basically to understand 5 points. Who is God? What is the position of living entities in relationship to God and the material nature and to family and obligation, etc.? What is time? What is the material nature? And what is man's duty, real duty in life? Or karma. So, Krishna answered those 5 points perfectly. Therefore, Arjuna then accepted to follow his instructions without attachment to the result. What was his attachment? His attachment was try to find happiness and self-contentment. But he didn't see how that would happen by killing either his cousin brothers or seeing his own family killed. But when he understood that as a Kshatriya, his duty is to protect the principles of religion, regardless of who is on the battlefield. Just like a policeman, it doesn't matter if his brother-in-law is a criminal. He has to pursue him, arrest him, and bring him to justice. He can't say, no, well, he's my family member, I can't do this. Otherwise, he will be prosecuted for a neglect of duty. So Arjuna was a trained Kshatriya. His whole training was about protecting the principles of religion or dharma. And the Kurus were adharmic, and his duty was to subdue them and reestablish the Yudhishthira as the king of the Kuru empire, which included the whole world at that time. So here it says, the false sense of proprietorship can be avoided simply by engaging oneself in devotional service under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his bona fide representative. Okay, so that is, okay, Arjuna fought, but he was actually freed from the reactions of fighting, although in the beginning, when he was non-violent, unwilling to fight, the entire responsibility was upon him. That is the difference between liberation and conditioning. A conditioned soul may be very good and act in a mode of goodness, but still he is conditioned under the spell of material nature. A devotee, however, acts completely under the direction of the Supreme Lord. Thus his actions may not appear to be of a very high quality to the common man, but the devotee has no responsibility. So this is also explained in the Bhagavad Gita in the 18th chapter, where Krishna explains that there are 5 factors to every action. And that it says here, 1 second, let me find it. It says that the 5 factors are, first of all, the place of action, that's the body, the senses, and the different endeavors, and the performer, the doer, and ultimately the Supreme Lord. So most people take into account 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 of the factors. Very few people take the 5th factor into account, that is the Supreme Lord himself. So here it says that the word adhisthanam refers to the body. The soul within the body is acting to bring about the results of activity and is therefore known as karta, the doer. That soul is the knower and the doer. The soul is the knower and the doer stated in the Shruti scriptures, Esahidrasta Shrasta, in the Prasna Upanishad. And it's also confirmed in Vedanta Sutra by the verse Gyota Eva and Karta Shastra Tavat. The instruments of action are the senses, and by the senses the soul acts in various ways. For each and every action there is a different endeavor, but all one's activities depend on the will of the Supersoul who is seated within the heart as a friend, or Krishna. The Supreme Lord is the super cause. Under these circumstances, he who is acting in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the super soul situated within the heart is naturally not bound by any activity. Those in complete Krishna consciousness are not ultimately responsible for their actions. Everything is dependent on the Supreme Will, the super soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whatever right or wrong action a man performs by his body, mind, or speech is caused by these 5 factors. Okay. Therefore, one who thinks himself the only doer, not considering the 5 factors, is certainly not very intelligent and cannot see things as they are. One who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled, though he kills men in this world, does not kill, nor is he bound by his actions. So in the explanation of this, it said, in this verse, the Lord informs Arjuna that the desire not to fight arises from false ego. Arjuna thought himself to be the doer of action, but he did not consider the supreme sanction within and without. If one does not know that a super sanction is there, why should he act? But one who knows the instruments of work, himself as the worker and the Supreme Lord as the supreme sanctioner, is perfect in doing everything. Such a person is never an illusion. Personal activity and responsibility arise from false ego and godlessness, or a lack of Krishna consciousness. Anyone who is acting in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the Supersoul or the Supreme Personality Godhead, even though killing does not kill, nor is he ever affected by the reaction of such killing. When a soldier kills under the command of a superior officer, he is not subject to be judged. But if a soldier kills on his own personal account, then he is certainly judged by a court of law. So here we see where personal activity and responsibility arise. They come from being dictated to by the false ego and having a sense of godlessness, not believing that there's a God or a superior authority. So, does this mean that I can strap a bomb on my belly and go into a public place and detonate it, and I will not be responsible? No. Because the key phrase in this purport that we just read is that Arjuna thought himself to be the doer of action, but he did not consider the supreme sanction within and without. That means that Krishna is present in the heart as Supersoul. And a Supersoul can give us an indication of what to do. But that indication has to be confirmed, that's from within. But that indication has to be confirmed from without by the bona fide spiritual master. With those two validations, then one can be sure that their action is correct. Like, for example, let's say I have a dream, and I dream I see Krishna, and Krishna says, wake up, go to the kitchen, take a knife out of the drawer, go upstairs and stab your wife to death. Now, I wake up and I say, wow, Krishna just told me to kill my wife. Should I do it? No, because harivilas in his lecture said, I have to also get confirmation from a spiritual mentor or guru. There are Siksha and Diksha gurus. So he calls his guru up and says, dear Prabhu, I just had a dream. Krishna appeared in my dream and he told me to stab my wife. What should I do? So, what should you do? Don't do anything. You see? So, we need to have that double confirmation. Because we could fall into the trap of hearing voices. Just like someone commits a murder, the police arrest them, and while interrogating them, the person says, I heard a voice, and the voice said, kill this person. Right? Okay, well, you're going to be prosecuted for murder. You know, but I heard a voice. I said, we know you heard a voice, and the voice gave you the wrong information, so you're going to be prosecuted for murder. So this hearing a voice is not receiving an indication from Paramatma. Because Krishna never gives any indication to someone to violate the laws of material nature. We do not have the right to kill anyone, not even an ant, because everything is an emanation from Krishna. The ant is also the child of God, and therefore we have to respect all life. In the case of warfare, there's superior sanction that comes from, it can be from a government, or it can be from Krishna himself. So we should always have this within and without confirmation, and to check to see that the voice from the inside is not some ghost rather than Krishna. We need to have a validation by a bona fide guru. See, without. So personal responsibility comes from false ego and a sense of godlessness due to a lack of Krishna consciousness. But when we act under the authority of Krishna and the Guru, we're no longer responsible for our acts. And the example of Arjuna is one example of that, where he received the order from Krishna to fight, but the reason for fighting was not to take over, not to have a kingdom, but rather to eliminate impious persons who were managing the kingdom, and establish Yudhisthira, who was a genuinely pious person, to establish a spiritual governance of the kingdom. Okay, so this personal responsibility and liability comes from following false advice. Okay, so next it says the conditioned soul. So we're trying to understand, this chapter is all about understanding material nature. The conditioned soul, therefore, transmigrates into different species of life, higher and lower, because of his association with the modes of material nature. Unless he is relieved of material activities, he has to accept this position because of his faulty work. So Srila Prabhupada explains, here the word karma dosai means by faulty actions. This refers to any activity, good or bad, performed in this material world. They are all contaminated. Faulty actions because of material association. So the so-called good karma and the bad karma are both bad, because if the motive, everything depends on the motive. If the motive is personal sense gratification, whether it's good through good karma or bad karma, it's all bad, because one has to take birth again to get the good or bad reactions. Here the word karma dosai means faulty actions. This refers to any activity, good or bad, performed in this material world. They are all contaminated, faulty actions because of material association. The foolish conditioned soul may think that he is offering charity by opening hospitals for material benefit, or by opening an educational institution for material education. But he does not know that all such work is also faulty, because it will not give him relief from the process of transmigration from one body to another. It is clearly stated here, Sad Asan Mishra Yonisu. This means that one may take birth in a very high family, or he may take his birth in higher planets among the demigods for his so-called pious activities in the material world. But this work is also faulty because it does not give liberation. To take birth in a nice place or a high family does not mean that one avoids undergoing material tribulations, the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease. Now, the example of this is the Kennedy family. Joseph Kennedy, the grandsire of the Kennedy family, made his fortune by bootlegging liquor during Prohibition. He was a criminal, but a high-class criminal, right? And then he sent his sons to Harvard and Yale and all this high, very prestigious universities. They got good education. His son, John Kennedy, was a World War II hero, and he was eventually elected president of the United States. And he was like a idyllic person. You know, he had a beautiful wife. He's president of the United States. He was handsome. He was young. He was dynamic. He was very rich. Right? And he was assassinated. Right? So, and then his other brother, one other brother, he was Attorney General under his brother, and then he ran for the presidency, and he was definitely going to win, but he was assassinated. And another brother, Edward Kennedy, he was a senator, but he went to a party and with a bunch of young girls, and he took one of them home, but on the way his car went into a river, and the girl drowned, and he saved himself. So actually he murdered that girl, right? But he got away with it because he was a Kennedy. He had good lawyers and a lot of money. And then other Kennedys, all kinds of horrible things happened to them in their family. So now they're very rich, very, very, very successful. But see, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or you're very poor. Everyone is subject to the miseries of this body, miseries caused by other bodies, and miseries caused by cataclysmic events. Doesn't matter, you're rich or poor, right? So, just because one takes birth in a nice place or a high family does not mean that one avoids undergoing the material tribulations, the pangs of birth, death, old age, and disease. A conditioned soul under the spell of material nature cannot understand that any action he performs for sense gratification is faulty, and that only his activities in devotional service to the Lord can give him release from the reaction of faulty activities. So again, we'll go back to the law of nature. The law of nature, as we read in the 5th chapter, says that anyone addicted to sense gratification will be afflicted by material miseries. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. This is a law of nature. And this is being repeated here also, that a conditioned soul under the spell of material nature cannot understand that any action he performs for sense gratification is faulty, and that only his activities in devotional service to the Lord can give him release from the reaction of faulty activities. So it doesn't matter whether you follow the Vedas for sense gratification or you don't follow the Vedas for sense gratification. Both ways you're going to get a reaction. And the reaction is material misery. Because he does not see such faulty activity. What's the faulty activity? It's either following the Vedas in order to improve sense gratification, or not following the Vedas in order to attain sense gratification. Either way, the goal is sense gratification, and either way there's going to be misery accompanying the sense gratification. Because he does not cease such faulty activities, he has to change to different bodies, some high and some low. That is called samsara padavim, which means this material world from which there is no release. One who desires material liberation has to turn his activities to devotional service. There is no alternative. Text 4. Actually, a living entity is transcendental to material existence, but because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, his material existential condition does not cease. And just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of disadvantages. The example of a dream is very important. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Due to different mental conditions, in dreams we are put into advantageous and disadvantageous positions. Similarly, the spirit soul has nothing to do with this material nature, but because of his mentality of lording it over, he is put into the position of conditional existence. Conditional existence is described here as dayato vishayam asya. Vishaya means an object of enjoyment. As long as one continues to think that he can enjoy material advantages, he is in conditioned life. But as soon as he comes to his senses, he develops the knowledge that he is not the enjoyer, for the only enjoyer is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 5.29, Krishna is the beneficiary for all results of sacrifices and penances, bhuktaram yagatapasam, and he is the proprietor of all the three worlds, sarvaloka maheshwaram. He is the actual friend of all living entities. But instead of leaving proprietorship, enjoyment, and the actual position as the friend of all living entities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we claim that we are the proprietors, the enjoyers, and the friends. We perform philanthropic work thinking that we are the friends of human society. Someone may proclaim himself to be a very good national worker, the best friend of the people and of the country, but actually he cannot be the greatest friend of everyone. The only friend is Krishna. One should try to raise the consciousness of the conditioned soul to the platform of understanding that Krishna is his actual friend. If one makes friendship with Krishna, one will never be cheated, and he will get all help needed. Arousing this consciousness of the conditioned soul is the greatest service, not posing oneself as a great friend of another living entity. The power of friendship is limited. Although one claims to be a friend, he cannot be a friend unlimitedly. There are an unlimited number of living entities, and our resources are limited. Therefore, we cannot be of any real benefit to the people in general. The best service to the people in general is to awaken them to Krishna consciousness so that they may know that the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and supreme friend is Krishna. Then this illusory dream of lording it over material nature will vanish. Next verse, text 5. It is the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus his mind and consciousness will be under full control. So, people are looking for happiness. And we can say that this happiness is Brahman, the Brahman effulgence. Why? Because the Brahman effulgence is a position of eternity. Hare Krishna. Shri Radha Nilamadava Ki Jai. It's the position of eternity, and there's no suffering in Brahman. And actually the description is given in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, last verse, where it says that And I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. Now, some people are looking for Brahman in meat, women, and wine. So their realization of Brahman is not the same as the devotees who are looking for Brahman in chanting Hare Krishna, dancing in Sankirtan, and having prasadam. The devotee's realization of Brahman is different than the materialist realization of Brahman, looking for it in meat, women, and intoxication. You see. So, they're not equal. The devotee's appreciation of Brahman is much more happier, much more full of duration, whereas the materialists looking for Brahman, or their perception of Brahman, is very limited. It's actually nasty and leads to misery in the end. You see. But everyone's looking for Brahman. But the way they're trying to achieve it, it's in different ways. So here it says that the process of liberation is very nicely explained in this verse. The cause of one's becoming conditioned by material nature is his thinking himself the enjoyer, the proprietor, or the friend of all living entities. This false thinking is a result of contemplation on sense enjoyment. When one thinks that he is the best friend to his countrymen, to society, or to humanity, and he engages in various nationalistic, philanthropic, and altruistic activities, all that is just so much concentration on sense gratification. So, now we know the position of all the politicians, the great friends of humanity, the nationalists, the philanthropists, the altruistic persons. They're just concentrated on sense gratification. The so-called national leader or humanist does not serve everyone. He serves his senses only. That is a fact. But the conditioned soul cannot understand this because he is bewildered by the spell of material nature. It is therefore recommended in this verse that one engage very seriously in the devotional service of the Lord. This means that one should not think that he is the proprietor, benefactor, friend, or enjoyer. He should always be cognizant that the real enjoyer is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. One must be firmly convinced of these three principles. One should always think that Krishna is the proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the best friend. Not only should he understand these principles himself, but he should try to convince others and propagate Krishna consciousness. As soon as one engages in such serious devotional service to the Lord, naturally the propensity to falsely claim lordship over material nature disappears. That detachment is called vairagya. Instead of being absorbed in so-called material lordship, one engages in Krishna consciousness, that is, control of consciousness. The yoga process necessitates controlling the senses. Yoga indriya samyamya. Since the senses are always active, their activities should be engaged in devotional service. One cannot stop their activities. If one wants to artificially stop the activities of the senses, his attempt will be a failure. Even the great yogi Vishwamrita, who was trying to control his senses by the yoga process, fell victim to the beauty of Menaka. There are many such instances. Unless one's mind and consciousness are fully engaged in devotional service, there is always the opportunity for the mind to become occupied with desires for sense gratification. One particular point mentioned in this verse is very significant. It is said here, prasaktam asatam pati. The mind is always attracted by asat, the temporary material existence. Because we have been associated with material nature since time immemorial, we have become accustomed to our attachment to this temporary material nature. The mind has to be fixed at the eternal lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Savai Manak Krishna Padara Vindayo. One has to fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna, then everything will be very nice. Thus, the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga is stressed in this verse. So, there's fixation on achieving happiness by owning and controlling temporary material things, people and objects. It simply prolongs our suffering. It doesn't, and the happiness we get is paltry. It's very minor compared to the suffering we get. It's not commensurate. We're being shortchanged. We're being cheated. And unless we realize that, we'll continue making the same mistake over and over again. And every time we get cheated or shortchanged. So last verse. One has to become faithful by practicing the controlling process of the yoga system and must elevate himself to the platform of unalloyed devotional service by chanting and hearing about me, meaning Krishna. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Yoga is practiced in 8 different stages: yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Yama and niyama mean practicing the controlling process by following strict regulations, and asana refers to the sitting postures. These help raise one to the standard of faithfulness and devotional service. The practice of yoga by physical exercise is not the ultimate goal. The real end is to concentrate and to control the mind and train oneself to be situated in faithful devotional service. So this is an important point. Unless we come to the point of continual, unabated devotional service, we have not understood Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. We might have a PhD in Srimad Bhagavatam, but we have not understood it. So there's a difference between knowledge and realization. If we actually realize that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the proprietor of everything, the best friend, and the ultimate beneficiary of all activities, then we'll be engaged 24 hours a day in his service. If we don't understand it, then we will be a bookworm. We can quote Sanskrit verses, we can analyze the Sanskrit, we can write books, but actually we are a nobody spiritually. Zero. In fact, less than zero. Because someone who's ignorant is zero. Someone who's educated but not a devotee is less than zero. So this is the litmus test of whether a person has actually understood Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So it says here, the real end is to concentrate and to control the mind and train oneself to be situated in faithful devotional service. Bhavena or bhava is a very important factor in the practice of yoga or in any spiritual process. Bhava is explained in Bhagavad Gita 10.8. Buddha bhavana samanvitaha. One should be absorbed in the thought of love of Krishna. When one knows that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the source of everything, and that everything emanates from him, aham sarvasya prabhava, then one understands the Vedanta aphorism, janmadasya yata, the original source of everything. And then he can become absorbed in bhava, or the preliminary stage of love of Godhead. So therefore the last line of that verse, it says, aham sarvasya prabhava, matak sarvam pavartate, iti matva bhajante mam, Buddha bhava samanvitaha. Then, Buddha bhava samanvitaha, one should be absorbed in the thought of love of Krishna. When one knows that Krishna is the origin of everything, and that everything is coming from him, everything belongs to him, And therefore, we should dedicate ourselves to the service of the Lord 100%. And then one will develop this Bhuta Bhavana Samanvitaha, pure love for the Lord. Rupa Goswami explains very nicely in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu how this bhava, or preliminary stage of love of God, is achieved. He states that one first of all has to become faithful, shraddhayanvitaha. Faith is attained by controlling the senses, either by yoga practice, following the rules and regulations and practicing the sitting postures, or by engaging directly in bhakti yoga. So there's three ways of attaining this faith. This strict yoga practice, which first rule of yoga, any yoga practice, is celibacy. You can't be a yogi if you do asanas and then you do illicit sexual activity. That's not yoga. In fact, yoga means you abandon all sexual activity in thought or physical action, and you completely control the mind and the senses. Or you can, as it says here, follow the rules and regulations and practicing the sitting postures. So doing meditation. Or you directly engage in devotional service or bhakti yoga. So these three waves of attaining faith. Of the 9 different items of bhakti yoga, the first and foremost is to chant and hear about the Lord. That is also mentioned here. Matkata shavanena cha. One may come to the standard of faithfulness by following the rules and regulations of the yoga system. And the same goal can be achieved simply by chanting and hearing about the transcendental activities of the Lord. The word cha is significant. Bhakti yoga is direct, and the other processes are indirect. But even if the indirect process is taken, there is no success unless one comes fully to the direct process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. Therefore, the word satyena is used here. In this correction, Swami Sridhara comments that satyena means niskapa tena, without duplicity. The impersonalists are full of duplicity. Duplicity meaning cheating, saying one thing, doing something else. Sometimes they pretend to execute devotional service, but their ultimate idea is to become one with the Supreme. This is duplicity, kapata. The Bhagavatam does not allow this duplicity. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam is clearly stated, Paramo Nirmat Saranam. This treatise, Srimad Bhagavatam, is meant for those who are completely free from envy. The same point is again stressed here. Unless one is completely faithful to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engages himself in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, there is no possibility for liberation. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we'll stop right there for tonight. So we see what is really recommended here is the direct process of bhakti yoga. The process of yoga practice or and following the rules and regulations. It's okay, but it's not recommended by Krishna. Krishna says, Yoginam apisarvesam madgatanantaratmana shadavam bhajate yomam same yuktata matak. Of all the yogis, one who abides in me with love and devotion, always thinking of me and always engaged in my service, is the best yogi of them all. So this direct process of devotional service is highly recommended by Krishna. He said, that is my opinion. Same yukta tamo matak. Okay, so we'll stop right there. Are there any questions? We're understanding material nature. third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 27. And we only covered 6 verses. There are 30 verses in this chapter. So,
the transcendental verse.
well,
3 and 27.
yeah, that's also significant.
Yeah.
No, 3, 27, 30.
Oh, jeez.
30 verses.
Wow.
Yeah.
All dimensions of transcendental
Yes.
incredibleness.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
How was your trip to India?
It was very good.